I spent 40 odd years in recruitment. I made my first placement in 1979 when I was still at college. I worked in WP, which was then half of what became IT. The other half was EDP. And then specialist recruitment for over 30 years, building, running, buying, selling a variety of recruitment businesses. Now, and for the last 10 years or so, I've been a non-exec director, chairman, board advisor to a variety of companies. Currently 11 businesses operating UK, Europe, North and South America, Africa, and Asia, basically across the world, mainly in recruitment or allied areas, software and compliance. Some people will have heard of Cube 19, Six Cats, Executives in Africa, the Recruitment Network, of course, and some you may not have heard of yet, JCW, Rec Hub, Kepler. And what I'm going to be talking about today is the differences between this time and the downturns that we've had in the past. And I wanted to start by saying thank you to a number of friends and colleagues, people like Russell Clements, the TRN guys, James Gordon, particularly Simon, Tony Goodwin, Sarah Fitzmaurice, Breno Cordiero, Michelle Riley, Gavin White, and Stefan Fiorini. Apologies if I've missed anybody out. And many other friends, colleagues and associates have all given me their input in terms of the sorts of things over the last few weeks that are going on and differences and what have you. And I'd like to start by reminding everybody what Douglas Adams put on the back of his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that is don't panic. First rule of a downturn, don't panic. I think the differences between this and others, it's more like the aftermath of 9/11 than the global financial crisis, in that it just seemed to happen. It wasn't a reflection of any structural dissonance or widespread investment bank shortcomings. It's a black swan event, genuinely, in that it wasn't really predicted. Russ did a really good post on Facebook this morning, saying it's all amazing how all these people are saying that we should have predicted it. We should have known about it. It's one of these things that it's happened. There's not much we can do about it. And arguably, the existential threat was much bigger during the global financial crisis. The whole financial system was under threat then. Everything could have stopped. I mean, most of us can remember, I'm sure. It doesn't feel like that with this crisis because we know there is an end, and even if we don't know exactly when it's coming. And as Anthony, I've got to learn to call him now, sorry. Anthony Goodwin said yesterday, every downturn is different, but this is astonishing. I love that word, astonishing, in that large parts of economies have effectively shut down. And as Sarah, MD of Executives in Africa, put it, cities have more or less closed down and become silent, which has added another dimension psychologically. If you remember the film Vanilla Sky, the Spanish film, but it was remade with Tom Cruise in the lead role. And there's one scene in it, I think right at the very beginning, where he's in the center of Times Square in New York. There's absolutely nobody around. Extraordinary psychological impact. And we actually see photos like that now with nobody, usually busy areas, absolutely empty. Yeah. Sarah also reminded me the reaction to this crisis, how it can be handled, what countries look like coming out of it, is going to vary from territory to territory. It's an interesting fact for you. The average age across all the countries in Africa, 54, 52, whichever number it is 18. And the average age across Europe is 42. Big difference. Michelle, who, big credit to her because she's my wife as well, putting up with me through lockdown, was quite positive though. And I'm going to share some of the thoughts in my own words that she shared with me. This is a forced situation. It wasn't caused by a financial crisis or anything we did wrong. Before COVID-19, unemployment was low, and in our sector, 2020, it got off to a very good start. Based on these factors, her feeling, and I share it, is that it's going to be a very different recovery process. I think the businesses that survive this will bounce back very quickly. In some sectors where projects need to be delivered and the budget is still available, I think we'll see a boom in hiring to get projects delivered. There's a very different energy in businesses at this time. Previous crises have caused depression. I'm not talking about the economic term there, but people have felt very down. I don't think that's the same feeling at the moment. I'm not talking about everybody, but I don't think most people are feeling that sort of depression. Most staff working from home, certainly the companies that I work with, are doing everything they can to keep the business moving and succeeding. They want to ensure that there is a job to go back to. it feels much more like there's a determination to fight to get through this and come out with a business that's ready to go full steam ahead when the lockdown's over. Also, the businesses in our sector have had the chance to get creative. We've had lots of working lunches where people have talked about different aspects of this, think differently about their business models and adapt to the change and to still facilitate what business there is. And I think it's going to have a long-term positive impact, because a number of organisations will discover successful ways to do things differently. The government has allegedly put measures in place to support business, employers and employees. This hasn't really been done before, not in this way. And I think this has built confidence in businesses, whether they use the support or not. In previous crises, businesses have been given no choice but to cut staff and cost to survive. And we've had to go through this many times in the recruitment industry. A very different encouragement is being given by the government this time. And I think this is helping businesses in our sector and others to think more positively. Also, knowing that all businesses and all people are facing the same challenges has to a certain extent alleviated the pressures that we would have felt in previous crises. Knowing it's a situation that's out of our control, not an impact of something that we've done or the business has done, and we're not encountering it alone, has made it much easier to focus on making those business decisions and stay positive. And we shouldn't forget, and this is where I'm going to delve into the memory banks here, that we have experienced much harder times than these as a country and as human beings individually throughout our history. There was a brilliant quote from Rod Liddell in an article last week, parodying those who criticised lockdown for being too draconian. And he said, a few weeks sitting on the sofa guzzling packets of crisps does not equate to life in East Germany. And he's absolutely right. It's very, very different from what people have had to put up with in the past. And my own memories of previous downturns make this seem, if I can use the word, relatively benign. We're at home, mostly comfortable with enough food and drink. I'm sure Claire could do with a bit more wine, but otherwise we're fine. We don't have 3-day weeks. We don't have constant power cuts. Remember, candles were the equivalent in the 70s of toilet rolls today. We don't have unburied bodies at the moment. We don't have rubbish piled in the street or school children delivering posts because of interminable strikes. Food shortages and I was one of those school children, by the way. We don't have food shortages endemic in this crisis, and rationing is localized and mainly confined to toilet rolls, as I said before. But the number of great cliches that have come out of this, or rubbish cliches, depending on which point of view, and these are, has been said before once or twice, unprecedented times. Even in World War II, which to be absolutely clear, I don't personally remember, the pubs and cinemas stayed open mostly for the duration. And after 9/11, Russ reminded me of this the other day. In New York City, Mayor Rudy Giuliano encouraged people to go to bars and restaurants, come into the city to stimulate the economy. Bill de Blasio is not doing that at the moment, and he's not likely to be in the near future. So this is different. There was a really bad downturn for the recruitment industry in 1991. Some might remember that, when the bottom completely fell out of the professional white-collar markets. From memory, December 1990, Harrison, which I was running, Rob Waters, which was run by Robert Waters, and Michael Page, none of us made a single perm placement in London in December 1990. In February 91, Coopers and Lybrand, which was one of the big 8 accountancy firms as they then were, laid off all their 300 newly qualified chartered accountants. Remember, our stock in trade in financial recruitment, because there was no work for them to do. By our count in HW at the time, Q1 91, there were about 100 suitable candidates for each new role. However, some good stuff came out of it. One of the good things, really good things that came out of that time was the acceptance. It became respectable for even white collar workers to do temp or contract work. There was no stigma attached any longer. And arguably, because that led into more engineers working on contract and the IT boom in the 90s and the noughties, arguably that had the biggest impact on our industry in the last 20, 25 years. Potentially, we could see some things coming out of this crisis and the way it's being dealt with, which will profoundly change the way we work in this industry for the better. We do, of course, have a potentially massive economic downturn coming. worse possibly than any previous downturn since the 30s, if you believe the IMF. But more from me about what the future might look like in the future, if you see what I mean. There's a great quote from Bill Bryson. He wrote a book called The Body, A Guide for Occupants, which is really good. My daughter's a bookseller for Waterstones, and she got me a signed copy, which is lovely. And he wrote, a successful virus is one that doesn't kill too well and can circulate widely. So even if you catch COVID, there seems to be better than a 95% chance of survival for most of us. It does appear easy to catch if you're in close proximity to a carrier. And of course, I don't want to make light in any way of those who've lost or tragically or will lose family and friends in these times. We do have lots of advantages now. And we've talked about this in the working lunch several times in the last couple of weeks, mainly tech stuff. The digital take-up has been huge. We've got networks, Louise just mentioned them, and we're using them. We've got online deliveries. We've got even a communicative government, who, even if you don't agree with their morals, politics, their actions, you have to admit they are doing something, and they are telling us about it ad nauseum. Remember, stay home, protect the NHS, and save lives. I know I'm not the first to say it, and this is an aside, but the NHS really is the closest thing we have in the UK to a national religion, isn't it? Anyway, talking a little bit about the future, a wise man said it's easy to predict anything except the future. I don't consider myself a wise man, so I'm going to give you a few predictions, which I'm very happy to be argued with. I think, in my opinion, we're going to see a strong bounce back in Chinese and global output by July. China's already started on the uptick. And I think by September, global activity will be back on trend. I think we are overall going to display a V shape in terms of the economic impact, with a current rapid downturn followed by an equally rapid upturn, all within the next 6 months. I'm not the only one that thinks that, but there are lots that don't. The recruitment industry, for those who survive, which has to be the fundamental initial objective for any business in any downturn, our industry is very much a bellwether for the economy. Tracy mentioned this yesterday. It usually falls further and faster than the general economy, goes into a downturn quicker, and comes out stronger and more efficiently at the turn. This has been demonstrated numerous times with empirical data by people like staffing industry analysts, James Wesley, amongst others. I think this time it's going to be a little bit different, in that our industry has been hit exactly the same time as most others. And signs are that there's still some business going on. The data shared by Tracy yesterday, and I see daily from Six Cats, Cube, my other companies, Absco, TRN, for example, indicates that business is still happening, admittedly in many areas at much lower levels. Perm has been hit much harder than contract, which I'm using contract as a generic term to cover temps, locums, interims, etc. This is completely understandable. Many contractors have been extended and across the world and are remote working wherever they can. Personally, and staying with the micro for a second, I think perm will come back weaker than contract in the UK and in most international markets. And I do agree with Tracy's view from yesterday that in the UK, we will see a flurry of startups coming out of this, as those laid off, furloughed, or just perceived generally they were poorly treated during the crisis decide to set up their own recruitment businesses and take the risk. I think we'll also see significant growth in the use of digital marketing as part of enhanced communication strategies, to lift something that Claire said a couple of days ago. And to directly quote her, we will all have enhanced our own digital skills base. Those firms who've communicated well and positively, critically, while being fair to their staff, their customers, their clients and candidates, they'll benefit both in direct and indirect ways. Those firms who are developing new markets and products will also benefit. I fervently hope that the trolls who've been negative and nakedly opportunistic by peddling lies, conspiracy theories, will suffer. You probably know who I'm talking about, Gigi. Also, I believe there'll be a much more flexible approach to work when the lockdown ends, in that firms will, for example, stagger commuting times, adopt a more grown-up attitude to working from home and remote working generally. Moving towards the macro view, I think that the recruitment industry will be better valued in this country in about time too, and seen more as a contributing profession, not parasitic as perhaps previously. Although I know from personal experience that profit and professionalism are definitely not mutually exclusive. We have to keep maintaining that professionalism. There will be pain in most economies, and this could have a significant effect on policies. We'll likely have World War II levels of debt, which our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren will be paying off, most likely. Of course, in my case, I'd also say that great-grandchildren, since my eldest granddaughter's 17 a couple of weeks ago. But it's not, in my view, an extinction level event. We haven't been hit by a huge meteor or massive solar flares. And critically, and this is really important for the debt side, the money's effectively free at the moment. So the bounce back may well be much quicker. Personal behaviours are going to have to be adjusted without question. We talked a lot about this in the working lunch. Claire said last week, we're definitely in for a period of social awkwardness, the thing about shaking hands. I'll just finish with a few more predictions before Mr. O'Donnell and others leap in. I think grandparents should and will be treasured more. I think 9 months on we'll see a baby boom, not in our house, but elsewhere perhaps. I will loathe 24-hour news even more than before. That came up again yesterday. I think virtual events are very interesting. Lurking lunch a couple of weeks ago, talking about virtual events, I think they'll increase in popularity. I think parents will appreciate their children's teachers more, and we'll all keep larger stocks of essentials. In the health service, I think they'll have much larger capacity of ICU beds, PPE, ventilators. People perhaps more prosaically will realise they don't need as much toilet roll as they thought they did. Hairdressers will see a mini boom. We won't all go to the hairdresser and make up for the ones we've missed, but they will certainly see a mini boom. And hopefully everyone will continue to wash their hands regularly as they are. We've become more aware of how germs and illnesses are spread. And people might spend less as they realise you can save by being on lockdown. And although it's tough, I think some of us will struggle to let go of it, or some people will, as it's caused everyone to stop and appreciate smaller things. I think people will spend more time doing things they realise actually make them happy. And local shops should thrive. We realise what a pain in the backside it is queuing in the supermarket, buying the same shopping week in, week out. It's going to be impossible, and this is a personal, painful one, to get tables in the best restaurants, as people will have missed socialising and eating great food. And the pubs that survive, they will run out of beer, I'm pretty sure, fairly soon. But they will start to thrive where they've previously been at risk, and I think we'll see pubs growing. Because who hasn't missed going to the pub? I think all our pets, dogs, cats, they're going to suffer from loneliness as we all return to work and take holidays. There'll be more funding for the NHS, tighter pandemic rules, I'm sure. Hopefully, a revised role for Public Health England, a massive bureaucracy, which has 100 managers paid more than the Prime Minister. It's an interesting point to note there. There'll be a much bigger uptake of flu vaccines and vaccines in general. We'll probably get tax increases, almost certainly, some possibly ring fence for the NHS. Fewer cruises, in my view, although the cruise industry aren't saying that. And endless crappy books, films and documentaries about the virus. And the world will hopefully stand up a little bit more to China in terms of the wet markets and other countries that have them. People will moan less about the small things. And this is a quote directly from Michelle. People will moan less about the small things and be grateful for life, health and freedom of movement. Fundamentally, I think it'll be an exciting and energizing future in which we hopefully can all share the experience of getting through. And I want to finish on a point made by Breno Cordiero, who runs a small IT recruitment company in South America that I'm invested in. And just to remember for all of us, there's always somebody worse off than you. And the sense of humor is critical to get us through. And these are his words. I'm not going to do his accent because he might well be listening. A final thought is that we were leaving a 4-year recession in Brazil and are now entering a new one on a global scale. It is fun to run a business here,